My name is Morgan, I'm 27, and last Thanksgiving changed my family forever. I was sitting at my parents' dining table in suburban Chicago when my mom, tipsy from too much wine, looked right at me and said, "Having Morgan was my biggest mistake." The room froze. 27 years of feeling not good enough crystallized in that moment. After a lifetime of swallowing my pain, something inside me finally broke. I decided to speak up. Before I share what happened next, where are you watching from? Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family during the holidays. I grew up in Glenview, a comfortable middle-class suburb outside Chicago. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. Dad Michael was an accountant, Mom Rebecca taught high school English, and my younger brother Jason and I were both honor roll students. Our colonial-style house had a well-maintained lawn, and we took annual family vacations to Florida. But appearances can be deceiving. My earliest memory is from when I was about 5 years old. I'd drawn a picture of our family and proudly showed it to my mom. She glanced at it and said, "The sky isn't purple, Morgan. Draw it again and do it right this time." That was Rebecca in a nutshell. Nothing was ever good enough, especially when it came to me. Dad was different, quiet, conflict avoidant, and largely absent emotionally. He worked long hours, and when he was home, he retreated behind his newspaper or disappeared into his workshop in the garage. Whenever Mom's criticism became too harsh, he'd simply say, "Rebecca, ease up a bit," but never actually intervene. His silence was its own form of rejection. Then there was Jason, 3 years younger and somehow exempt from the impossible standards I lived under. When Jason brought home a B+ on his math test, it was celebrated. When I brought home an A, I was asked why it wasn't an A+. When Jason forgot to do his chores, it was boys will be boys. When I missed one dish while cleaning the kitchen, I was irresponsible and not paying attention to details. I tried everything to win Mom's approval. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, earned a full scholarship to Northwestern University, joined every club and volunteer organization I could. The pattern was always the same: a brief acknowledgement followed by, "But what about?" There was always something more I should have done, something I'd overlooked, some way I'd fallen short. During my sophomore year of college, I had my first panic attack. I was preparing for finals, and despite studying for weeks, I was convinced I would fail. I ended up in the campus health center with a racing heart and difficulty breathing. The doctor gently suggested I speak with a counselor, but I was too embarrassed. In our family, we didn't discuss mental health. We didn't show weakness. We certainly didn't talk to strangers about family issues. After graduation, I accepted a job offer in Boston. The distance was intentional, far enough that weekend visits weren't expected, but not so far that it seemed like I was running away. I threw myself into building my career in marketing, quickly advancing from coordinator to specialist to manager. Last month, I was promoted to senior marketing executive at just 27. When I called home to share the news, Mom said, "That's nice, but aren't those tech companies laying people off these days? Is your position secure?" Jason's promotion to assistant sales manager at his local insurance office, however, warranted a family dinner celebration. 2 years ago, after a failed relationship that I now recognize mirrored my dynamic with my mother, I finally started therapy. Dr. Martinez helped me see the patterns I'd been blind to and understand how my upbringing had shaped my people-pleasing tendencies, my anxiety, and my constant feeling that I wasn't enough. I learned about emotional neglect and how criticism can become a form of control. Most importantly, I began to build boundaries and develop a sense of self-worth that didn't depend on external validation. When the invitation came for Thanksgiving this year, my initial instinct was decline. I had friends in Boston who were hosting a Friendsgiving, and the thought of spending 4 days in my childhood home made my stomach knot. But Dr. Martinez and I had been working on family interactions, and I thought this might be an opportunity to practice my new communication skills in a time-limited setting. Plus, a small part of me still hoped that time and distance might have improved things. I flew into O'Hare the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Mom and Dad picked me up, and the drive home was filled with superficial conversation: the weather in Boston, Dad's golf game, the new neighbors across the street. Mom did ask about my job, but it felt performative, without genuine interest. Before we'd even reached Glenview, she'd moved on to excitedly sharing details about Jason's engagement to his girlfriend, Kaitlyn. I'd only met her once, briefly, during my last visit home. Walking into my childhood home felt like stepping back in time. My room had been partially converted into a home office, but Mom had kept my old debate team trophies on the shelf, physical reminders of achievements that were never quite enough. I set down my suitcase and took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was no longer that desperate to-please child. I was an adult with a successful career, a life I'd built on my own terms. I could handle 4 days. Little did I know how those 4 days would permanently alter the course of our family. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the familiar scent of pumpkin pie and the sound of the Macy's parade on television. I came downstairs to find Mom already busy in the kitchen, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, wearing the embroidered apron Grandma Leaner had given her years ago. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "You're finally up," Mom replied, glancing at the clock. It was 7:30 a.m. "I've been up since 5 getting things ready. Could you at least make yourself useful and peel those potatoes?" And so it began. I silently took up position at the sink and started peeling, reminding myself of Dr. Martinez's advice. You can't control her behavior, only your response to it. The house gradually filled with family. Grandma Leaner arrived first, her silver hair neatly coiffed, bringing her famous cranberry relish. She hugged me tightly and held me at arm's length. "Look at you, Morgan. Boston agrees with you. Tell me all about that promotion." For the first time that day, someone actually wanted to hear about my life. I'd barely started describing my new role when Mom interrupted. "Morgan, the potatoes need to be in the pot now if they're going to be ready on time." Grandma Leaner gave me a knowing look and squeezed my hand before moving to the living room to rest her arthritic knees. Next came Aunt Stephanie, Uncle Robert, and my cousins Emily and Ryan. Emily immediately showed me her engagement ring, and we fell into easy conversation about wedding plans. Ryan, now in his first year of medical school, seemed more subdued than I remembered, the pressure of his studies evident in the dark circles under his eyes. Jason and Kylan arrived last, to much fanfare. Mom rushed to the door to embrace them both, exclaiming over Kylan's new haircut and Jason's choice of wine. "My baby boy has such good taste," she gushed, as though he'd personally crafted the bottle rather than simply purchasing it from the local liquor store. Throughout the morning, I tried to make myself useful without being in the way. I arranged the cheese board, set the table according to Mom's exacting specifications, and fielded questions about why I wasn't seeing anyone. "The right guy just hasn't come along yet, Aunt Stephanie," and whether I was concerned about my biological clock. "Not particularly, Uncle Robert." We gathered around the table at 3 o'clock. Dad carved the turkey with surgical precision, a task he took pride in executing perfectly year after. Mom arranged and rearranged the serving dishes until they met some invisible standard of presentation. Jason told animated stories about his sales victories, while Kylan gazed at him adoringly. I sat quietly, taking small sips of wine and preparing for the inevitable moment when attention would turn to me. It came during the second round of helpings. Aunt Stephanie, perhaps noticing my silence, asked, "So Morgan, tell us more about this potion." Senior marketing executive sounds impressive. I described my new responsibilities managing our company's largest client accounts and the team of 5 I now supervised. I was in the middle of explaining an innovative campaign I'd developed when Mom cut in. "That all sounds very nice, but I hope you're not working too hard. You're looking a bit tired, and those Boston winters can be so harsh. Have you been taking your vitamins?" Before I could respond, she turned to Jason. Now, Jason's company provides such good benefit. Healthcare, dental, 401k matching. So important for the future, especially with a wedding to plan. The pattern continued throughout the meal. Each time I spoke, Mom found a way to redirect the conversation or subtly undermine what I was saying. When I mentioned possibly buying a condo in Boston, she reminded everyone about the housing market crash of 2008. When I talked about a digital marketing award our team had won, she wondered aloud whether all that computer work was bad for my eyes. By dessert, I noticed Mom's wine glass had been refilled several times. Her cheeks were flushed, and her comments were becoming less subtle. When Grandma Leaner complimented my pumpkin pie made from her recipe, Mom laughed. "Well, Morden always did better with precise instructions to follow. Remember that disaster of a science project in 5th grade when she tried to get creative?" I felt my face burn with the memory of the failed experiment and Mom's disappointment. 20 years later, and she still brought it up. As coffee was served, the conversation turned to parenting. Aunt Stephanie was sharing a story about Ryan's childhood stubbornness when Mom, now visibly tipsy, jumped in. "Parenting is just a series of mistakes you hope don't cause too much damage," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Some mistakes are bigger than others, though." She looked directly at me, her gaze slightly unfocused. You know, if I could do it all over again, I'd do so many things differently. Having Morgan was my biggest mistake. I wasn't ready, should have waited like we did with Jason. The room went silent. I felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked out. Time seemed to slow as I registered what she'd just said, in front of our entire family. My biggest mistake. The words echoed in my head, confirming what I'd suspected my entire life but had never heard stated so bluntly. Dad stared at his plate. Jason looked horrified. Kylan's mouth had fallen open slightly. Grandma Leaner's knuckles whitened around her coffee cup, and something inside me broke. I couldn't breathe. Mom's words, having Morgan was my biggest mistake, hung in the air like poison. 27 years of feeling unwanted, inadequate, and invisible crystallized in that single sentence. The room around me seemed to blur, sounds becoming distant as though I was underwater. In that moment, every memory of rejection flooded back. The time she'd forgotten to pick me up from soccer practice, leaving me sitting alone on the curb for 2 hours in the rain. The 8th grade art show she'd skipped to attend Jason's baseball game, even though his team played every week and my painting had won a regional prize. The high school graduation party she complained about organizing, making it clear it was an obligation rather than a celebration. The college parents' weekend she cut short because she had a headache after spending barely 3 hours on campus. I became acutely aware of my physical reactions, my racing heart, the cold sweat breaking out across my forehead, the trembling in my hands. The familiar tightness in my chest signaled the beginning of an anxiety attack. I forced myself to take a deep breath, then another. Around the table, everyone seemed frozen in shock. Aunt Stephanie's fork was suspended halfway to her mouth. Uncle Robert was suddenly very interested in rearranging the crumbs on his plate. My cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dad cleared his throat and weakly said, "Rebecca, you don't mean that." It's the wine talking. His pathetic attempt at damage control only made it worse. Not "how dare you say that about our daughter," or "that's completely untrue and hurtful." Just a feeble suggestion that she wouldn't have said it sober, not that she didn't believe it. Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Michael, don't be so sensitive. Morgan knows what I mean. We were just so young, and our careers were just starting." The timing wasn't right. She took another sip of wine, seemingly oblivious to the damage she'd inflicted. Jason, to his credit, tried to redirect. "Hey, did anyone see that football game yesterday?" Unbelievable comeback in the 4th quarter. But his desperate attempt at changing the subject felt like another dismissal, another way of sweeping my pain under the rug to maintain the family's fragile peace. Grandma Leaner was the only one who acknowledged the gravity of what had just happened. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, her touch warm and steady. Her eyes, so similar to Mom's in color but completely different in their expression, held mine with a mixture of sorrow and encouragement. As the awkward silence stretched on, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but alongside it rose a new emotion: anger. Not the destructive kind that lashes out blindly, but the clarifying kind that finally sees a situation for what it is and refuses to accept it any longer. Dr. Martinez's words came back to me: "Your feelings are valid. Your experiences are real. You deserve to be treated with respect." I realized that if I said nothing now, nothing would ever change. We would continue this dance of criticism and silence, of pain inflicted and pain endured. The pattern would perpetuate, possibly for decades to come, unless I had the courage to break it. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. My mouth was dry, and my voice might shake, but I knew with absolute certainty that I could not let this moment pass. I looked around the table at my family, at the people who had shaped me, for better and worse. I saw Mom's dismissive expression, Dad's conflict avoidance, Jason's discomfort, the extended family's embarrassment, and I saw with perfect clarity how this dynamic had played out countless times before, always ending the same way, with my feelings buried to keep the peace. Not this time. I set down my napkin, straightened my shoulders, and took a deep breath. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet but steady, carrying clearly in the silent room. "Mom," I said, looking directly at her. "I need to respond to what you just said. For 27 years, I began, my voice steadier than I expected, I've tried to be good enough for you. I've tried to earn your love and approval through perfect grades, achievements, career success, anything to hear you say you were proud of me just once without a but following it." Mom's eyes widened slightly, whether from surprise at my response or the directness of my gaze, I couldn't tell, The table remained silent. When I was 7, I continued, I spent weeks making you a handmade Mother's Day card with pressed flowers from our garden. You pointed out that I'd misspelled beautiful and put it in a drawer. When I was 12 and won the regional spelling bee, you asked why I'd hesitated on the word acquiesce. When I got into Northwestern with a scholarship, you wondered aloud if I should have aimed for an Ivy League school instead. I could see recognition dawning on several faces around the table. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern that had played out consistently over decades, always witnessed but never acknowledged. Jason could bring home a C and get congratulated for trying his best. I brought home straight A's and was reminded of the one quiz I'd missed earlier in the semester. He forgot chores and was just being a boy. Completed mine perfectly and was told I was doing the bare minimum expected. I glanced at Jason, who looked down at his plate. This wasn't about blaming him, he was as much a product of the family dynamic as I was. Dad, I said, turning to him, every time Mom criticized or dismissed me, you said nothing. Your silence taught me that I wasn't worth defending, that keeping the peace was more important than protecting your daughter from constant criticism. Dad's face flushed, and he opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. The thing is, I continued, my voice softening slightly, I've spent most of my life believing something was fundamentally wrong with me, that I was inherently unlovable or defective in some way. It's taken 2 years of therapy to understand that the problem was never me. Mom's expression hardened. Therapy, you're in therapy, talking about our private family matters to a stranger. Her voice had that familiar edge of disapproval. Yes, Mom, I'm in therapy, I replied calmly, and it's probably the healthiest decision I've ever made. Dr. Martinez has helped me see that what I experienced growing up has a name: emotional neglect. I was never physically abused, never went without food or shelter, but the constant criticism, the impossible standards, the comparison to Jason, it all taught me that my feelings didn't matter, that I didn't matter. I took a sip of water, aware that everyone at the table was watching me with expressions ranging from shock to discomfort to, in Grandma Leaner's case, something that looked like pride. What you said today, that having me was your biggest mistake, wasn't really new information. It was just the first time you've said out loud what your actions have communicated my entire life. And I want you to know that I'm done trying to earn your approval. I'm done accepting the scraps of affection that come with conditions. I'm done pretending that the way you've treated me is okay. Mom's face had gone pale. You're completely overreacting, she said, her voice rising. This is exactly the problem. You've always been too sensitive, too needy. I sacrificed everything for you kids, and this is the thanks I get. Being attacked at my own Thanksgiving table. I'm not attacking you, Mom. I'm telling you how your words and actions have affected me. There's a difference. I kept my tone even, refusing to be baited into the kind of emotional outburst that would let her dismiss my points. Well, I think, Mom began, but was interrupted by the last person I expected. Rebecca, that's enough. Grandma Leaner's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Morgan is speaking her truth, and you need to listen. Mom turned to her mother in shock. Mom, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Grandma Leaner said firmly. I've watched how you've treated Morgan for years, and I've regretted every time I didn't speak up. I won't make that mistake again today. The support from my grandmother gave me strength to continue. I'm not saying these things to hurt you or to get revenge. I'm saying them because this pattern has to stop. I deserve better, and honestly, so do you. This dynamic isn't healthy for anyone, including you. I looked around the table. I love this family, but love shouldn't require perfection. It shouldn't come with conditions. And it absolutely shouldn't leave someone feeling like a mistake. I stood up, my legs slightly unsteady. I think I need some air, and honestly, I don't think staying here tonight is the best idea. I'm going to get a hotel room. Morgan, don't be ridiculous, Mom said, but the usual authority in her voice had diminished. I'm not being ridiculous, Mom. I'm setting a boundary. I'll come by tomorrow to get my things before my flight. I turned to the rest of the family. I'm sorry if this made anyone uncomfortable, but I'm not sorry for finally speaking my truth. As I walked upstairs to grab my purse and coat, I heard the murmur of voices resume in the dining room. I caught snippets: Mom's defensive tone, Grandma Leaner's firm responses, Aunt Stephanie's concerned questions. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't consumed with worrying about what they were saying about me. I had spoken my truth, and that was enough. The November air was crisp as I walked to my rental car. My hands were shaking as I put the key in the ignition, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through my body. As I pulled away from the house that had never truly felt like home, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for the maternal relationship I'd never had, anxiety about the fallout to come, but beneath it all, an unfamiliar sense of lightness. For the first time in 27 years, I had stopped carrying the weight of being a mistake. I had placed that burden back where it belonged. I checked into a Holiday Inn 10 miles from my parents' house, the closest hotel with vacancy on Thanksgiving night. The room was generic and impersonal, but it felt like a sanctuary after the intensity of what had just happened. As soon as the door closed behind me, the emotional dam broke. I sank onto the bed and sobbed deep, body-racking sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being. I cried for the little girl who had tried so hard to be perfect. I cried for the teenager who had believed she was fundamentally unlovable. I cried for the young woman who had moved hundreds of miles away but could never escape the critical voice in her head. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen, until the cheap hotel pillowcase was soaked with tears. When the storm finally passed, I lay exhausted on the bed, staring at the textured ceiling. My phone, which I'd silenced during my drive, buzzed repeatedly with notifications. With a deep breath, I picked it up to assess the damage. 3 missed calls and 2 texts from Jason. "Are you okay, and please call me when you can." 1 missed call from Dad. 5 missed calls and a text from Mom. "You've ruined Thanksgiving. I hope you're happy with yourself." This is exactly the kind of dramatic, selfish behavior I was talking about. A long text from Aunt Stephanie. "Morgan, I'm so sorry about what happened. Your mom was way out of line. I should have said something years ago about how she treats you. Please know you have support in the family. Let me know if you need anything." A missed call from Grandma Leaner. And a text from Uncle Robert that simply said, "Proud of you, kiddo." I couldn't deal with any of them yet. Instead, I called the one person I knew would understand without judgment. Rachel answered on the second ring. "Hey, how's the family Thanksgiving from hell going?" "Ratch," I managed before my voice broke again. "Morgan, what happened? Are you okay?" Her tone immediately shifted from playful to concerned. I recounted the entire scene: Mom's devastating comment, my response, the family's reactions, and my escape to the hotel. Rachel listened without interrupting, making only occasional sounds of outrage or support. "Oh my God, Morgan," she said when I'd finished. "I can't believe she actually said that out loud. Actually, scratch that, I absolutely can believe it. But I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. That took incredible courage." "I don't feel courageous," I admitted. "I feel like I'm going to throw up. What if I've just destroyed my entire family? What if this makes everything worse?" "First of all," Rachel said firmly, "you didn't destroy anything. You just finally acknowledged the dysfunction that was already there. And second, maybe things need to get worse before they can get better. This pattern has been going on your entire life. Did you really think it would change without some major disruption?" She was right, of course. Dr. Martinez had said something similar many times. Real change rarely comes without discomfort. I managed a small laugh. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been taking notes during all our post-therapy debriefs," Rachel replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Now, have you eaten anything since the dramatic exit? Because confronting decades of family trauma on an empty stomach seems like a bad idea." I realized I hadn't finished my Thanksgiving dinner. "No, but I'm not sure I can eat." "Room service," Rachel insisted. "Right now, and call Dr. Martinez in the morning. This is exactly what emergency sessions are for." After promising Rachel I would eat something and text her updates, I ordered a club sandwich from room service and then called Dr. Martinez's emergency line. She called back within 20 minutes and scheduled a virtual session for the following morning. Sleep didn't come easily that night, despite my emotional exhaustion. My mind kept replaying the scene at the dinner table, analyzing reactions, imagining different outcomes. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were vivid and unsettling, filled with voices and faces from my past. The morning session with Dr. Martinez helped ground me. "What you did took extraordinary courage, Morgan," she said, her calm presence reassuring even through the video call. "Setting boundaries with family is one of the hardest things we do in life, especially when those boundaries have been non-existent for so long." "But what now?" I asked. "My flight back to Boston isn't until Sunday. That's 3 more days." "You have options," Dr. Martinez reminded me. You can change your flight and go home early. You can stay at the hotel, or you can return to your parents' house with clear boundaries about how you expect to be treated. After our session, I decided to extend my hotel stay and reach out to select family members individually. Jason was first. We met at a coffee shop halfway between the hotel and our parents' house. His face was drawn with concern as he slid into the booth opposite me. "Morgan, I'm so sorry," he said immediately. "What Mom said was horrible. And you're right, I've benefited from the double standard our entire lives." "It's not your fault," I told him honestly. "You didn't create the dynamic." "No, but I never challenged it either," he admitted. "It was easier to accept the favoritism than to question it. That was selfish of me." We talked for nearly 2 hours, peeling back layers of our shared childhood from our different perspectives. For the first time, Jason acknowledged seeing the disparity in how we were treated. He confessed to sometimes feeling suffocated by Mom's excessive attention and expectations for him to be the perfect son, though in ways very different from the pressures I'd faced. "I always thought you were so strong," he said. "You seem to have everything together: grades, friends, plans for the future. I never realized how much you were hurting." "I got really good at hiding it," I replied, "even from myself for a long time." When we parted, our relationship felt different, more honest, more equal. Jason promised to support me in establishing healthier boundaries with our parents, though we both acknowledged it wouldn't be easy. My next meeting was with Grandma Leaner, who insisted on picking me up from the hotel for lunch. At 81, she still drove her Buick with confident precision. "I've wanted to have this conversation with you for years," she said as we settled into a booth at her favorite diner. "But I made the mistake of thinking it wasn't my place to interfere." Over club sandwiches and soup, Grandma shared insights about my mother that I'd never known. Rebecca had been raised by a father who was even more critical and demanding than she was with me. My grandfather, who died before I was born, had been a perfectionist who rarely offered praise and frequently expressed disappointment. "That doesn't excuse how she's treated you," Grandma Leaner emphasized, "but it might help you understand it." Rebecca mothered as she was mothered, despite promising herself she'd do better. It's a cycle, and cycles are hard to break without awareness. She reached across the table to take my hand. "What you did yesterday, speaking your truth with such clarity and dignity, was remarkable. I want you to know how proud I am of you." Her words brought fresh tears to my eyes. The maternal validation I'd sought from Mom my entire life was being offered freely by her mother. The hardest conversation was with Dad, who texted asking to meet Saturday morning. We sat in an empty park, watching a few hardy joggers brave the November chill. "I failed you," he said simply, staring at his hands. "Every time Rebecca criticized you unfairly and I said nothing, I failed you." "Why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. "Why did you never stand up for me?" Dad was quiet for a long moment. "Fear," he finally admitted. "Fear of conflict. Fear of making things worse. Fear of facing the problems in my marriage." He looked at me directly. "But mostly, fear of acknowledging that I was allowing my daughter to be her. Because once I acknowledged it, I'd have to do something about it." His honesty was painful but oddly healing. For the first time, Dad wasn't making excuses or minimizing the situation. He was accepting responsibility. "I don't know if Rebecca and I will ever have the relationship I've wanted," I told him. "But I do know I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it isn't. The price is too high." "I understand," Dad said. "And for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. It's taken me 30 years of marriage to even begin having these conversations with your mother. Don't wait that long to prioritize your own well-being." The only person I didn't see before leaving for Boston was Mom. She sent several texts oscillating between defensive anger and self-pity, but never once acknowledging the hurt she'd caused or taking responsibility for her words. I decided that distance was the healthiest choice for now. As my plane lifted off from O'Hare on Sunday afternoon, I felt both drained and strangely peaceful. The Thanksgiving confrontation had been painful, but it had also been necessary, the first step in a long overdue process of healing. Returning to Boston after Thanksgiving felt like emerging from an intense emotional storm into calmer waters. My apartment, with its mismatched furniture, overflowing bookshelf, and the peace lily that somehow thrived despite my inconsistent care, had never looked so welcoming. This space was mine, created on my terms, free from criticism or judgment. The first week back was dedicated to intensive self-care. I took long baths, ordered my favorite takeout, watched comfort movies, and slept more than I had in months. Dr. Martinez had emphasized the importance of being gentle with myself after such a significant emotional event. Speaking your truth was the beginning, not the end, she reminded me during our session that week. Now comes the work of maintaining those boundaries while processing all that's happened. My phone remained relatively quiet. Jason texted every few days with updates on his life or funny observations, our communication more authentic than it had ever been. Dad sent a brief message saying he was working on things, but gave no details. Grandma Leaner called once a week, our conversations warm and supportive. From Mom, there was nothing but silence. As Christmas approached, the inevitable question arose, would I go home for the holidays? The mere thought sent my anxiety spiraling. Dr. Martinez helped me work through my options and ultimately supported my decision to decline the family gathering this year. Setting boundaries isn't about punishment, she said. It's about creating conditions where you can engage with your family without compromising your well-being. I wrote a careful email to my parents explaining that I wouldn't be joining them for Christmas but would be happy to schedule a video call on Christmas Day. Dad responded with understanding. Mom didn't respond at all. The video call on Christmas was awkward but civil. Mom was clearly still hurt and angry but maintained a brittle politeness that was somehow worse than outright hostility. She showed me Jason and Kylan's gifts, described the menu for Christmas dinner, and mentioned the neighbor's excessive light display, all without ever making eye contact with the camera or asking a single question about my life. Dad tried to bridge the gap with questions about Boston's winter weather and my plans for New Year's Eve. Jason and Kylan waved from the background, but seemed hesitant to get too involved. After the call, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The distance I'd created was protecting me from active harm, but it couldn't heal the underlying wound of having a mother who seemed fundamentally incapable of seeing or accepting me as I was. January brought an unexpected development. My phone rang one Tuesday evening, and to my shock, Mom's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Morgan," Mom's voice sounded different, less confident, slightly hesitant. I wanted to tell you something." I waited, my heart pounding. "I've started seeing someone, a therapist." The words seemed to physically pain her. "Dr. Winters. It was Dad's idea, actually, or rather, his condition for, well, that's not important right now." I was momentarily speechless. My mother, who had once said therapy was for people too weak to handle their own problems, was seeing a therapist. That's good, Mom," I finally managed. "I've only had 3 sessions," she continued, her voice stiff, "but Dr. Winters suggested it might be helpful too. Open lines of communication. So that's what I'm doing." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of what had happened at Thanksgiving. But it was something, a tiny crack in the wall of denial she'd built around her behavior. "Thank you for telling me," I said, unsure how else to respond. "Yes, well," she cleared her throat. "How's the weather in Boston?" And just like that, we were back to superficial conversation. But something had shifted, however slightly. The following weeks brought gradual, halting attempts at communication. Mom would call, we'd talk about safe topics for 10 minutes, and then she'd find a reason to end the call. Sometimes she'd ask a question about my work or my friends, though she rarely followed up on my answers. Occasionally, she'd mention something from her therapy sessions, always framed as Dr. Winters says, rather than her own insight. Our 4th call ended abruptly when I gently suggested that her criticism of Aunt Stephanie's parenting choices sounded similar to how she'd often criticized. "That's completely different," Mom snapped. "If you're just going to attack me every time we talk, there's no point in trying." She hung up before I could respond. Dr. Martinez helped me process my disappointment without losing sight of the bigger picture. "Recovery isn't linear," she reminded me. "Your mother is just beginning to confront patterns she's maintained for decades. There will be resistance, backsliding, defensiveness. The question is whether you can maintain your boundaries while allowing space for that process." February brought another surprise, this time from Jason. He called to tell me he'd stood up to Mom when she'd made a dismissive comment about my absence from a family dinner. "I told her that she needed to respect your boundaries if she wanted to rebuild your relationship," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "She didn't like it, but Dad backed me up. I think she's starting to realize that this isn't just going to blow over." Dad, too, was making efforts. He began calling me separately from Mom, our conversations awkward but increasingly honest. He sent me a book on father-daughter relationships with a note that reads simply, "Trying to understand better." Small steps, but meaningful ones. In March, Mom suggested a video call with her therapist, Dr. Winters, a kind-looking woman with silver-streaked hair and a direct manner that somehow managed to be both compassionate and no-nonsense. "Your mother has been working hard to understand some patterns in her parenting," Dr. Winters explained after introductions. "She's asked for this joint session as a step toward more productive communication." What followed was challenging but surprisingly productive. With Dr. Winters' guidance, Mom was able to listen to some of my experiences without immediately becoming defensive. She even acknowledged, in halting terms, that her perfectionism had often manifested as criticism. "I thought I was pushing you to excel," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I didn't see it as what you described." It wasn't the full recognition I'd hoped for, but it was more than I'd ever received before. The real test came in April, when I agreed to fly to Chicago for a weekend visit. We met on neutral ground, a restaurant downtown rather than the family home, for our first in-person conversation since Thanksgiving. Mom looked older somehow, the lines around her mouth more pronounced. She'd dressed carefully in the blue sweater I'd sent for her birthday, a detail that didn't escape my notice. The first 30 minutes were excruciating, stilted small talk punctuated by long silences. Then Mom set down her fork and looked directly at me for what felt like the first time in years. "I've been thinking about what you said, about feeling like you were never good enough." Her voice was tight with controlled emotion. "That wasn't my intention. But intentions don't matter as much as impact, as Dr. Winters keeps telling me." I waited, hardly daring to breathe. "When I said you were my biggest mistake," she continued, the words clearly difficult for her, "I wasn't talking about you as a person. I was talking about my own unreadiness to be a mother. I was 24, just starting my career, still figuring out who I was. I resented having to put my ambitions on hold, and I think I transferred that resentment to you sometime." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of the pattern of criticism and emotional neglect that had defined our relationship. It wasn't a full apology for the decades of feeling unworthy. But it was the first time my mother had ever admitted any fault in our relationship, and that meant something. "Thank you for telling me that," I said softly. Mom nodded, then quickly changed the subject to Jason and Caitlin's wedding plans. The moment of vulnerability had passed, but it had happened. A small breach in the wall of denial that had stood between us for 27 years. As I flew back to Boston that Sunday, I reflected on the messy, imperfect beginning of what might eventually become reconciliation. Mom might never be the mother I'd yearned for as a child, the one who celebrated my successes unreservedly, who offered comfort rather than criticism, who made me feel unconditionally loved. But perhaps we could build something new, a relationship between adults based on honesty, boundaries, and gradual healing. It wouldn't be perfect. It wouldn't erase the past, but it might be enough. 6 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, I find myself reflecting on how much has changed. The spring sunshine streams through my apartment windows as I prepare for a video call with Dr. Martinez, highlighting the vase of fresh tulips on my coffee table, a small luxury I now allow myself without questioning whether I deserve it. "How are you feeling about your trip next week?" Dr. Martinez asks once we're connected. "I'm flying to Chicago for Mother's Day weekend, my first extended stay with my family since Thanksgiving. The timing feels significant, a chance to redefine what this holiday means for me and for my relationship with Mom." Nervous, I admit, but not in the same way as before. I'm not afraid of her criticism anymore. I'm just uncertain about navigating this new territory. Dr. Martinez smiles. "That's growth, Morgan, huge growth. And it is. Over these 6 months, I've experienced changes I never thought possible. My constant anxiety has diminished. My people-pleasing tendencies, while not gone completely, have lessened to the point where I can recognize and interrupt them. Most importantly, I've developed a stronger sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation. This growth has extended beyond my family relationships. At work, I've become more confident in presenting my ideas and setting boundaries around my time and energy. When my boss tried to saddle me with an additional project that should have been assigned to another team, I calmly explained why it wasn't feasible given my current workload, something I would never have done in the past. My personal relationships have transformed as well. I ended a friendship that I realized was one-sided and draining, something the old Morgan would have maintained at any cost to avoid conflict. I've started dating Ethan, a kind and thoughtful software engineer who respects my boundaries and seems genuinely interested in understanding me, not changing me. My relationship with Mom continues to evolve in fits and starts. She still struggles with criticism and control, but now I have tools to respond rather than react. Sometimes I calmly point out when she's being critical. Sometimes I simply change the subject. And sometimes, when necessary, I end the conversation and try again another day. Mom has continued her therapy, though she rarely discusses it directly with me. Dad mentioned that she's been reading books on perfectionism and generational trauma, small steps toward greater self-awareness. She hasn't had another outburst like the one at Thanksgiving, though whether that's due to genuine change or simply fear of consequences remains unclear. Dad has made more visible progress. He calls regularly, just to check in. He's become more direct in our conversations, less prone to smoothing over difficult topics. Last month, he apologized specifically for times he witnessed Mom's criticism and remained silent, naming particular incidents I'd almost forgotten. "I should have protected you," he said simply. "I'm trying to do better now." Jason and I have developed a closer relationship than I ever thought possible. We text almost daily, sharing jokes, frustrations, and the mundane details of our lives. He's become an unexpected ally in family gatherings, gently redirecting Mom when she slips into old patterns and creating space for me to speak when I'm being overlooked. Grandma Alina remains my steadfast supporter. At 82, she's embraced technology with surprising enthusiasm, mastering FaceTime so we can have weekly virtual tea dates. "I'm making up for lost time," she told me recently. "I should have been this present in your life all along." As Mother's Day approaches, I find myself contemplating what healing really means. I used to think it meant erasing the pain, returning to some imagined state of wholeness that existed before the hurt. Now I understand that true healing is about integration, acknowledging the wounds while not allowing them to define me, recognizing the past while not remaining trapped in it. Mom may never be able to give me the unconditional love and approval I craved as a child. She may never fully acknowledge the extent of the emotional neglect I experienced. She may never change certain fundamental aspects of her personality. And I'm learning that's okay. I don't need a perfect mother to be whole. I don't need her validation to know my worth. What I need, what I've fought for these past 6 months, is the freedom to be authentically myself, to set healthy boundaries, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than performance and approval. When I spoke up at Thanksgiving, I wasn't just confronting my mother. I was confronting a lifetime of silence, of swallowed pain, of accepting treatment I didn't deserve. I was breaking not just a family pattern, but a generational one, a cycle of criticism and emotional withholding that had been passed down like a poison heirloom. The journey hasn't been easy. There have been painful conversations, tearful therapy sessions, moments of doubt and regression. There have been times when I questioned whether speaking up was worth the upheaval it caused. But then I remember who I was before: constantly anxious, chronically people-pleasing, fundamentally believing I was somehow defective, and I know that no matter how difficult the path has been, it was the right one. As I pack for my trip to Chicago, I include a small gift for Mom, a book of poetry by Mary Oliver that Dr. Martinez suggested, with its reminder that you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. It feels like an appropriate message for us both. I don't know exactly what this Mother's Day weekend will bring. I don't know if Mom will ever fully understand the impact her words and actions have had on me. I don't know if our relationship will ever feel completely healthy and whole. But I do know this: I am no longer afraid to speak my truth. I am no longer willing to shrink myself to make others comfortable. I am no longer living as though I were a mistake. And that, perhaps, is the greatest healing of all. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family healing in the comments below. Have you ever had to speak up to break a harmful pattern? What gave you the courage to do so? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories about healing and growth. Remember, speaking your truth might be scary, but the freedom on the other side is worth it. Thank you for listening, and until next time, be gentle with yourself, you deserve it.